Well, something I learned from my friend Bob when I called him before I took this position back in 2002. I said, I've never managed anything, and possibly that's why the defense community is not necessarily the best at presenting data or understanding data or really making its case to the funders. We make the case to the judges and others, and that's a different type of strategy. And it ultimately begins with the mission, and that's why I've got our mission up there. And it begins with our board as well, but our mission is to provide financial and technical support to counties to develop and maintain, and you'll see, quality and cost-effective indigent defense systems that meet the needs of local communities and requirements of Constitution and state law. Well, the commission wants to know, how do we know that it's quality and cost-effective? How do we know whether or not the jurisdictions are meeting the various requirements? Fortunately, my commission and the board that I answer to wants these answers, and the good news is they've built in research and development, and one of the strategies and goals that we've had is to promote and encourage good decision making through evidence-based practices. So that's an enviable position to be in. The National Legal Aid and Defender Association realized that the defense community was lagging far behind other criminal justice organizations in its ability to present information. And as Andre alluded, this was the 50th year anniversary of Gideon. And what were the headlines? You know, Gideon's unfulfilled promise, we're still in a state of crisis, it's still broken 50 years later. Well, how do we know? How are we going to take it to the next level? How are we going to take it to the next step? Well, if we use the same strategies we've used for the last 50 years, it's not going to work. So what do we need to do? And since we're talking about a lot of money, we need to have some information for our commissioners, me, the legislature, our legislative people, so that we can tell the story that Valerie was talking about and think like a system, as Jennifer was talking, and the information that Travis County is doing. But we need that data, and part of this initiative is NLADA partnered with North Carolina. North Carolina got it. They formed their commission probably about 2 years before us and have really utilized data to fund their system adequately. They still got their challenges and all. It was interesting this past session for North Carolina, the prosecutors were coming in belly aching that North Carolina Indigent Defense System was getting too much money. Well, the prosecutors weren't presenting data. So if we want to really fulfill the promise of Gideon and not in 20, 25 years still hear the broken stuff, we need to change our strategy. And so part of this is why this program, I think, is so dang important. We've seen transformation in Bell County. As Bob was talking about, well, the old system's kind of case processing. Well, Bell County's moved into case management. And so that people can make an informed decision, so their elected officials know how that money's being spent. The jurisdictions want fairness in trial. They want to get the right result, but they don't want to waste money because there's not unlimited resources. So you have to give the people that are making the decisions that information. So they partnered with NOADA. They formed a National Research and Data Advisory Committee, which I was fortunate enough to get selected. And there's folks from across the country, Oregon, Massachusetts, Texas. And one of the jobs of that committee was to select 4 jurisdictions across the United States that could partner with North Carolina and look at some basic information, look at outcomes, as Meg was talking about, look at access to attorneys. Also look at some kind of pretrial indicators. You heard Valerie talking extensively about bail and its implications. And take a look at those various jurisdictions and kind of compare and see if we can tell, kind of comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And when we're talking about case and definition, our very first meeting, God, it was painful. We spent a whole stinking day arguing about a case, and really, finally, end of the day, the researcher, it was almost in tears because it was a bunch of lawyers, and we just weren't going to agree. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. So what Bell County did, getting its elected officials, getting its defense lawyers at the table, getting its data people, getting the county there. Same with Travis, getting all of the people, Deborah Hale and all the administrators, the judges and others at the table. Sometimes those talks are painful, but if you're really going to change your system, transform the culture, make it better, ultimately be more accountable, you've got to have the players at the table. The reason we've been successful is y'all coming here, working with us, and then being able to partner with people like Bob and having people that kind of are, have your backside. And so this national legal aid, the 4 jurisdictions, well, North Carolina was the one who was, pioneering this. The other state system is Connecticut, Public Defender Service, and then 2 county systems. One is Travis County was selected, and Knox County in Tennessee. Mark Stevens had public defender there. And so these were the 4 pilot sites. And at the last meeting we had in D.C., just I guess it's probably a week or 2 ago, Margaret Gressens, who's the head researcher, brilliant woman, state of North Carolina, was bragging profusely on Travis County and the data that these folks are able to do in their information system. So when you can get somebody like a Mark Irwin in your jurisdictions who's a data person, an IT court manager, fired up about this, some change can happen. So it's exciting for me to work with Mark and do what they've been doing, and Deborah has been working with us since actually before the Fair Defense Act. So having that group, the charge, whoops, so we got here, I'm getting a little too far here. The charge basically also was a developed toolkit. Right now, the toolkit for this group is going to be published sometime in late spring, early summer next year. And really the main purpose is to increase the data literacy of the defense community across the board. That's one of the main goals, and provide them just basic information so that they understand that if you want to change the culture and change the way things are being done, you got to do it a little bit differently. And you really need to understand, you don't have to, be a statistician or anything like that, but you have to know that if you're going to make your case, just the qualitative stories and anecdotes and things of that nature are not going to work. The Commissioner Perez's are going to want data. They're going to want data, and they're going to want hard data. Bring in the qualitative. That's what lawyers are good at, storytelling. You want to have that piece too, but you have to combine the qualitative and quantitative. So what was the impetus of this? And I've kind of mentioned this already. Defense community is absolutely in last place. And that's why we're seeing the headlines that 50 years later it's still broken, and so we're last place. Christ, we're behind the courts. The courts courts are not necessarily the most progressive, and I worked for the judiciary, I guess, since 1993 now in one capacity or another. But they've taken the bull by the horns with the National Center for State Courts and basically came up with a concept called core tools. And I'm sure a number of the jurisdictions in here utilize this. And they came up with 10 key measures. We're not going to go into any detail on any of those, but and how they can tell whether or not courts are, doing justice, and what are the things that matter to them. What are their values? What Mark and Meg talked about is Travis County's doing the values meeting. They've got the judges there. Hey, what do you value in this area? So coming up with those performance indicators or those key, that's the hard part. That's really the hard part when you're sitting down. What are we going to measure? Because from the defense community, the public defender, defense lawyer, is going to look from the client's perspective. Well, they need to look more than just from the client's perspective, because when they go in front of the commissioner's court, they have to be looking at it from the commissioner's perspective. So you want to know that you're being able to tell it from the client's perspective, but you also need to know from your funder's perspective and then the public's perspective. So there's a number of different stories that you need to be able to tell, and you need to be thinking, really, the defense community needs to be thinking about all of those as they're going through. These are just taken from the Fair Defense Act. It's not anything that's been specifically promulgated by the commission, but when you begin kind of thinking about the metrics, Jennifer kind of alluded to these. I know Travis County and their plannings have basically incorporated all of those. So yeah, let's meet the requirements so the reports that they're going to be pushing out meets the requirements. So Joe Laurent's my policy monitor for the state. This here, if we can get this information, shot to us, then it's like, okay, we know that they've met those various requirements. So you've heard, and we've talked a little bit about the various studies. The commission really, with PPRI and Dottie and her team, we started this in 2003 with basically a study addressing one particular area to help inform policy making. The two most recent, one is Harris County that the Justice Center did, and then Wichita County that Dottie and her team did, and then, of course, the Regional Capital Public Defender. So I'm going to leave, and this is kind of a little bit of an offshoot of what Professor Hanlon said, but Peter Drucker once said, you can only manage what you can measure, and what's measured is improved. If there's a book that any of you want to read, it's written in 1967 by Peter Drucker, The Effective Executive. So I know that we've got a room full of chiefs and deputies. I highly recommend you read that book. That book and a number of other Peter Drucker's books have been my Bible. And that was the one book I asked Bob in 2001. I said, okay, if I read one book, what is it? And it's Peter Drucker's The Effective Executive. It's still just as valid today in 2013 as it was in 1967. Transitioning into the breakouts. This is really the most important aspect. This part here, kind of informing, educating, getting you the information, the resources. And the resources, as Marissa had indicated in the email, are all available electronically. I believe she sent you a meeting notebook. Any presentations that were added today will be posted online. We will also send those out to you. The work group, so for the last hour of the day, we're going to break, of course, get a cup of coffee or Coke or cookie or something on your way out.